Hello, and welcome to this brand new Blender Smoothie tutorial. This is going to be the first tutorial on the site that's not Christmas themed, finally. I think that series dragged on maybe a little longer than it should have. Probably could have shortened up some parts of it. So today we're going to be looking at something entirely different. I've always been fascinated by bacteria, as weird as that may sound. And I thought it might be kind of cool to create a tutorial based around that, since with all the new shaders and everything integrated into cycles, it's maybe a little bit more difficult to get some of the materials to look right if you're trying to go for a microscopic feel. So yeah, that's what we're going to be working on today. This is the final result, more or less, right here on the screen. I guess some of these parts in the background are kind of haphazardly thrown together. Take as much or as little time on that as you want. Personally, I think it does look a lot better if you coil some of them a bit more instead of keeping some of them so straight. Sorry about that. So yeah, we're going to get started on that. This is basically a cyanobacteria, I believe is how you say it, which is one of the, or actually it is the earliest known life form on Earth. So I thought it would be a good topic for the tutorial for that reason. So let's get started. I'm going to create a new Blender scene before we do that. And let me turn on my display keys there. Okay. So first of all, we need a good reference image to work from. So I'm just going to split my view and switch this right window to the UV image editor. And I'm just going to go open an image. Got one right here. Pulled this off of Wikipedia. Just look up cyanobacteria on Wikipedia, and it's the profile image for it, essentially. So you can see it looks pretty interesting up close. You have all these little segmented areas, and then you have sort of this casing around the outside, and it's kind of connecting to some spots. I don't know how well you can see that there. Some areas like that. So first of all, the first thing we need to do is create a model of the actual bacterium. So to do that, we're going to be using a lot of modifiers, maybe a lot. I don't know exactly how many, but we've got to get a curve modifier and an array modifier and all these other things. So let's just start. I just deleted the lamp there because we're going to be adding our own lamp and everything. We'll select the cube and delete that too. And I'm just going to add a circle. Because we're going to be repeating this segment so many times, we don't want it to have too many vertices, so I'm going to lower this to something really small, like 5, which is as low as you can get it, with it still actually looking like a circle from a distance, really. So I'm just going to rotate that along the x-axis 90 degrees, and the z-axis 90 degrees. That's rx 90, and then rz 90. Just so we have it facing that way. And I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode and just extrude that. Press X to extrude it along the x-axis, and hold down Control so it's locking to the little units in the middle there and it's not just going really smoothly. That way we can get a very precise measurement. Yeah, something like that should work. And then I'm just going to extrude this really quickly. Move that over, scale it down a bit. And, you know, I'm actually just going to add an edge loop right there. Let's scale that down a little bit. That was Control R for the edge loop. So this is just going to be our basic segment that we're going to be working with. And we're just going to have this repeat for a really long time with an array modifier. We are going to have to manually add some caps to the end, because as you can see, well, there are some of them, I guess, that do look kind of square, like that part right there. But for at least some of these, we're going to have to add some round caps after we complete the repetition of all of these segments, just so there's not some sort of hole in the side. So the next thing we want to do, actually, first of all, is scale this down. Just because I'm trying to keep everything sort of in the boundaries of the grid here. Alright, so we can go to the modifiers panel now and add an array modifier. And of course, this creates an array of objects. Let me switch that. If you've never used the array modifier before, these offset options basically determine how far the repeated objects are offset and where they're offset. So you have this first axis here, which is the x, because it always goes x, y, and z, always in alphabetical order in this software. So we have it being offset on the x-axis. You see now it's above the x-axis and below the x-axis. We don't want to offset it along the x-axis because we want the segments to repeat this way, so left and right. So we actually want to offset it, we'll set that to 0, along the y-axis. Change that to 1. Oh, maybe it's the z-axis. Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah. Okay. So sometimes you have to work with those a little bit because it can be kind of a trial and error thing. But once you've got that, then you can just repeat this bunch. We're not going to be adding a subsurf modifier or anything to this to smooth it out. It looks really blocky up close, but once you have it at about the size that these are at, you're really not going to be able to notice, especially with the shaders we have on it. And the poly count gets really, really high when you're arraying all these objects if they have subsurf modifiers. So I'm just going to keep increasing that count. We want a fairly long chain, maybe something somewhere around 100. Will probably work for the first one. I might even go higher than that. I'd go with 125-ish. Yeah, something like that. I'm going to scale it down even more because, again, I'm just trying to keep it all in this general area. We can change the shading to smooth just because it does look a little less blocky that way. Now, the next thing we want to do is give it a little bit of variation, a little bit of curve, because right now it's just perfectly straight. It looks really terrible. So I'm going to add a Bezier curve. And it can get a little tedious to do it this way because when you're trying to create multiple bacterium, then you kind of have to readjust each curve for each specific one and then reassign it to the curve modifier. And it's kind of monotonous, but it looks a lot better than manually adding any sort of twists and turns via edit mode. So this is the way we're going to do it now. I'm just going to move that to the middle there and scale this up a bit. And got a couple interesting shapes in here. We also have something else to keep in mind is that they're not all smooth curves. You can see there are some kind of kinks in these chains. You can see there's one sort of right there. I don't know how easily you can see these, but there's another one right there and another one right there. So we do want to add a couple sharper areas of curve. Yeah, we'll just start with something. We'll start with something kind of simple, maybe sort of like that, and then maybe we'll scale that down a bit. That curve around. Maybe, I don't know about that. Maybe we'll adjust that a bit so that there's kind of a sharpness down there, but this area is a lot smoother. Okay. Might want to move that up a little bit more, just to start with. Okay. That'll work for our first one then. I am actually going to relocate the object origin, because you can see right now it's way down here in this area. It's typically best to have it at the beginning of the object, which would be right there. So I'm just going to press Tab to go back into edit mode, and I'm going to right click that to select it, and just press Shift S first, so we can position the 3D cursor to the selected area. Then tab back into object mode and press Shift Control Alt C, or I suppose you could go over here to the origin button, because it's probably a lot easier than that shortcut key. And choose Origin to 3D Cursor. And then we can press Shift S and Cursor to Center to put that back in the center there. Whoa. Okay. So the next thing we have to do is add a curve modifier to our little segmented chain here. So I'm just going to add a new modifier, curve, and we should probably name that just so we can keep them all straight. We'll just call this, let's call it 1. We'll number them because there are going to be a lot of these in the end. And I'm going to name this 1 as well. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Name this and we'll just name it 1A. Alright, and now we can select that from there. And there is the deformation that we're looking for. You may have to reposition it like I just did there. Sometimes it's offset, sort of like that. And you just want to press G to move it and position it right about there so that the end of the object is lined up pretty well with the end of the curve. Okay, and I am going to increase that count a bit more. Actually, I'm also going to scale this up a bit. Might be the better way to do it overall. Something like that. Okay, and you can see we've got kind of some weird sharp edges along here. It's looking kind of strange in those areas because it's not as smooth as we would like it. Let me just hide that for a second. You can see that that issue is because of the curve. The curve isn't very smooth itself. So to fix that, we can come over here into the curve panel, and I believe it's this setting right here. Maybe if we double that. Yeah, because that smoothed it out quite a bit. So I'm going to press Alt-H to bring that back. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And that's going to be our test subject, essentially, because we've got to work out the shaders and the lighting and all that other stuff before I'm going to really start duplicating this and changing it up a bit. So I'm just going to position, first of all, I'm going to drag a box around these, pressing B for box select, and I'm just going to put that right about there in the center. And I'm going to position the camera directly above this object. So to do that, you can just make sure you're in top view, first of all, which is 7 on your number pad, and make sure that you're not in perspective. It should say top ortho, not top persp, short for perspective. And press Control-Alt-0. And that will lock the camera to the view that you're in, which is directly above, so we can just sort of move it around from there. The thing about this is you'll notice in the side here that this is a square image, so I'm going to fix that too really quickly. We'll just come over here to the render settings, and we'll make it 1000 by 1000. Oops. Alright. And that's good enough. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is get the lighting set up. We are going to be using the Cycles render engine, of course, for this. The first thing I want to get straight is the background. So I'm just going to switch over to rendered view, and I'm going to enable use nodes. It's actually probably a pretty good color. We don't want to make it completely black. That tends not to go well with the shader settings, even if we have a fairly good lighting setup. So I tend to go with sort of a mid-range gray, somewhere in there. And the thing you'll notice about this image, of course, is it's backlit, as most microscopes are. So basically what we want to do is add a plane, and I'm just going to drag this down so that it's not at the same elevation as the actual object is, and scale it up, just so that it's big enough. Maybe we can move that a little bit, kind of get this positioned, just like that. Okay. Let's render that, adjust the settings here. I'm going to add a new material, and we'll just call it light, and we'll change the type from diffuse to emission, and move that all the way up to there. Okay. Now, you'll also notice in the background you see all this weird gunk back there. That's just kind of other stuff that got put in the dish with the bacteria. Smaller little particles and other things like that that are just in the background. We're going to do that exact same thing by basically creating an overlay for the light, but we're actually going to do that later because the more urgent issue at this time is the shader. So we're going to take care of that really quickly, and then maybe we'll work with the background and duplicate the bacteria. So basically, first of all, we just need to split the view here so we can have our node editor. We're going to be working a lot with transparency, maybe a little bit of translucency, but really mostly transparency, because you can see there is quite a bit of transparency in these. We're going to be using a lot of textures in addition to that, mostly built-in textures, just to give those areas a little variation, to give the transparency a little variation and whatnot. So I'm just going to start by deleting this diffuse shader, and I'm going to add a transparent shader and a translucent shader, and a mixed shader, of course, to combine the two. Alright, so, and that gets us something like this. It's kind of hard to tell what it should look like since we don't really have a color yet. So I'm just going to use the eyedropper tool here, and we'll pull a color out of there. Not too happy with that. We can do the same thing there. That's a little better. Okay. You know, I think maybe instead of doing a translucent, transparent thing, let's try something else here. I'm just going to delete those, and I'm going to add a glass shader. We'll see how that works. Alright. I think that does look a little bit better. You can see we've sort of got a little bit of fuzziness in the outside there, kind of a dark outline. Yeah, that's probably going to work better. So that's essentially going to be the basis for our shader. Now, you'll notice that, of course, there are also these little segments in here that aren't really showing up very well for this. What I would typically do for that, and I think will work best in this case, is to create a separate material for those little edges. So, well, we should probably name this. I'm just going to name this bacteria. We'll call it bacteria light. And then I'm just going to add another one and call it bacteria dark. And we'll keep this a diffuse shader, and I'm just going to kind of make it a really dark teal, something like that. And then I'm going to go into edit mode here and select that side, assign that there, select that side, assign that there. And now we have those segments that we were looking for before. Those are really intense. We could probably brighten this up a bit. Maybe something more like that. Yeah, that works better. Okay, so we've got that segmented. It's working pretty well. One thing you may notice is that we've kind of got a bit more shading going on here than we might like. That may not make much sense, but basically what I want to do is kind of flatten this a little bit, because the shading and everything doesn't look quite as accurate when it's this tall. So I'm just going to select this and press SZ and squish it quite a bit, something down to around there. Maybe if we render that again, we'll get a bit of a better result. Okay, yeah. That's something you want to take care of pretty early on. It just looks a lot better in the end because you don't have kind of shadows when it slopes as much. So it looks a bit more like the image. Okay. So from here we can pretty much start to move on to the variation. Maybe some darker spots and lighter spots and more transparent spots and more opaque spots. So the first thing we want to do is select the right material. Then the first thing we want to do is move that over. We're going to add a texture. So I'm going to zoom out a bit more to give me a little more room there. I'm just going to add a noise texture. And the first thing I want to do is adjust the transparency. So I want some spots to be more transparent than others, and we're just going to use this noise texture as sort of a map for that. So I'm going to add another shader. I'm just going to add a regular diffuse shader. You know, yeah. Well, I'll use a transparent. Now I'll use a translucent shader. Oh, yeah, that'll work. So I'm going to copy that and maybe make that a little darker too. And this is going to be our more opaque part. So I'm going to add a mix shader and combine those two. And that's what we get right there. It's a lot darker. So we basically just want to use that as the factor. And we don't really notice much of a difference at first. We've got to tweak these texture settings a bit. First of all, they need more contrast, so I'm going to add an RGB curves node. And basically what we want to do here is make the bright spots brighter and the dark spots darker. And now you can really see it starting to show up, because we really bumped up the contrast there. I'm going to lower the scale to 2, just so those spots are quite a bit bigger. And I'm going to lower the detail to 0. Might even lower the scale even farther to maybe 1.5. And I'm actually going to make that a little brighter while I'm at it. Maybe make that a little clearer. No, make that a little brighter. Okay. Alright. So now you can see we've got some areas that are kind of transparent, and some areas that aren't as transparent. It's contrasting maybe a bit more than I would like it to. Make that a little darker. Maybe make that a little brighter. But that definitely helps to add more variety to it, and it makes it look a lot more organic as well. Yeah, so once we've got that, actually gonna lighten that up a little bit more. Make it something more like that, because we don't want it to be too obvious. That's probably a little too bright. Alright, there we go. Now the next thing we want to do is add this outline around here. You can see it as sort of a casing. And this is going to do a lot for how it looks. It's going to look a lot better with that. So it's one of the first things we should probably take care of. So basically, all I'm going to do is I'm going to go into edit mode here. I'm going to select this edge loop by holding down Alt and right-clicking it. And I'm going to duplicate it, scale it up just a little bit, something like that. There we go. And I'm going to press P to separate it. So now we have this separate little thing that if we maybe press Tab to go into edit mode and extrude. Whoa. Maybe. Something like that. We've just got to get it so that it's basically so that it lines up pretty well with what we have there. So I can also scale that down a tiny bit. Alright. And let's set that smooth while we're at it. Do I need to recalculate the normals? I don't think I do. Okay. And we're going to add a new material to this. So I'm just going to delete that, add a new material, and I'm just going to call this bacteria casing. And we'll move that over. Just going to delete that, and I'm going to add a completely transparent shader, because we want this to be totally transparent, except for the edges. So if I render it now, yeah, we should only be able to see what we had before. And I'm basically going to mix this, so I'll add a mix shader, with a much darker diffuse. Maybe we could just use the eyedropper tool and grab from one of these darker areas there. Just like that. And basically I want this only to be gathered around the edges. So I'm just going to add an input Fresnel node. And you can already see that when we do that, it sort of splits it and pushes those areas towards the edge, which is exactly what we wanted. Looks maybe a little too thick. I'm going to thin that out a little bit. Maybe make it 1.25. Maybe 1.15. I think 1.25 will work. Okay. I think it's also a little too close to the actual object, so I'm going to go back into edit mode and select all of that, and I'm just going to scale it along the the Y and Z axes. So to do that, to avoid scaling along the X axis, because if we do that, then it's going to make the whole thing longer and we'll have to realign it and everything. I'm just going to press S, Shift X, and that'll just expand it a little bit that way. So that maybe now if we render it, it'll be a little better. That's a little better. Maybe even a little more than that, actually. S, Shift X. Something more like that. There we go. That's good. Okay. Yeah, so that adds quite a bit. Now, in addition to that sort of outer casing thing, there's one other thing that we really want to add to this that's really going to enhance the look. And those are, if you look really, really closely, again, I don't know how well you can see it, but you have these little dots that are inside the segments, and adding those would really, really help as far as the realism of this goes. So I'm going to turn that up a little bit more. Basically, to do that, what we're going to do is add a particle system to this inner segment, and we're essentially going to create a quick little texture to be used as a dot, because if we use a circle or anything like that, it's going to add up to a lot of faces in the end, and we really want to use as few as possible since we're going to be duplicating this quite a bit. So the first thing I want to do is go to another layer. And I'm just going to add a plane, and press Z to go back into solid view there. And I'm basically going to create a new texture, so I'm just going to go over here to the image editor and click image, add a new image. And I'm just going to name this dot, and we're going to make this tiny. We'll make it 128 by 128. Probably doesn't even have to be that big, but I'm just going to, yeah, we can make it even smaller than that, actually. We'll just make it 64 by 64, because these dots are going to be really tiny, and we don't want massive texture sizes, especially if you're using your video card to render like I am, because it can really eat up that power. So I'm going to switch that to the UV grid, just so we can sort of see what we're doing. And I'm going to press U after I go into edit mode. I'm going to press U and project from view. And then I'll just scale that up, kind of align it. Okay, and I'm going to add a new material, a new texture, image texture, right there, and load that. And if we go into textured view, then, yeah, we can see it. Okay. So basically all I want to do is add a dot to this image. So I'm going to switch over to paint mode. I'm going to press N to pull up our paint settings. It's on white right now. It's good. Oops. Make sure that's turned up all the way so we can fill it in completely. And once we've got that, then I basically just want to lower the brush size a little bit. Get black color in there. Paint a dot right there. Just like that. And that's essentially going to be used as a mask, just so we can get the transparency and everything in there. Should probably name this material too. Let's call that dot. We'll name this dot too. Keep everything consistent. Okay, so we should save that image. So I'm going to click Save As Image. And I'm just going to find a spot right along here, name that, save it there. And, okay, basically, like I said before, we're going to be scattering this over the object as a particle system. We should finish the shader really quickly. It's a pretty simple shader. Basically, if we were to put something behind this right now, like say a cube maybe, let me just zoom out a little bit, rotate that. If we were to put a cube behind that and render this, couldn't see the cube because this isn't transparent, the edges aren't. So to fix that, I'm just going to that. We'll make this a black color, and I'm just going to add a new transparent shader, make sure that's completely white, and we'll mix those two together with that image texture as the factor. And now you can see around the edges. So that's exactly what we want. And yeah, it looks pretty good. So I'm just going to duplicate that cube because we don't need it for anything. I'm going to go back over here. And the unfortunate downside to using a particle system is that you have to apply the modifiers to these segments here. So typically it's something that I would add at the end, just because we have to apply the curve modifier and apply the array modifier and all those other things. Well, I don't know if you have to apply the curve modifier, but you have to apply the array modifier. So it's typically something that's better left for the end after you're certain that you're finished manipulating all the different parts of the scene. So that's all we're going to do there for now. And let's focus on the background before we duplicate this a little bit more. Because, like I said before, there are some other things in the background that sort of gave it a more realistic look. So I'm just going to move these to another layer in there so that they're not on the same layer as the dot. And basically I have a texture that I created with a couple textures from CG Textures. I can post the link to that in the description of this video or on my site, wherever you're watching this. And basically we're just going to use it as a mask and as color for an overlay that we're going to put in front of the lamp. So the first thing we want to do is add a plane. Scale that up. Just get that positioned right about there. That should be good. Actually, we'll want to move it down so that it's pretty close to the bottom there. Scale that up even more. Okay. I'm going to add a new material, and I'm just going to call it backdrop. And load that texture that I was talking about. Find it here. I believe it was under there. Yeah, there it is. Okay. So you can see we've got some splatter patterns and a bit of a brownish color, sort of a brown yellow in that area. This is going to be really blurred, of course, because it's going to have some depth of field and everything in the background. But all we want to do right now is tab into edit mode, press U to unwrap and project from view. And line that up. Then we'll come up here, add a new material in the node editor. Okay. And basically, first of all, let's just make sure that's mapped properly. Should be, but okay, yeah, it is. Now basically what we want to do from here then is do essentially the same thing we did with the dot, is we want to use this as a mask. Actually, I created a separate image for the mask, so this will just be the color map. So I am going to go ahead and disconnect that. Actually, no, we'll leave that connected. You know, we'll use a translucent shader instead. We'll see how that works. Connect those. Okay. And then I'm just going to mix that with a transparent shader. And I'm going to duplicate that, make that image a single user, and I'm going to load this image, which, as you can see, is the mask. We'll just connect that there, and I'm going to render that and see how it looks. Okay. So, yeah, it looks pretty good. I assume I don't have it backwards. Yeah, otherwise it would end up like that. Okay. And again, that'll be blurred and everything, so it's not going to look quite like that, because it looks pretty bad right now by itself, but it will look a lot better once the depth of field is in. So now that we've got the background sorted out, all we have left to do before the particle systems and then a little bit of compositing at the end is to duplicate the bacteria. So I'm going to move these back back over here, the first layer, and yeah, I think I'm just going to pause the recording for a second while I take care of that. So basically all I'm going to be doing is selecting these things and duplicating them. Maybe I can duplicate one or two here just to show you some of the things you'll have to do, because I'm going to duplicate this right now. However, you'll notice that when I duplicate it, if you come here to the curve modifier, oh, no, maybe it did Okay, that's really cool. I was kind of expecting it to be, to remain parented to the original curve, but apparently it adjusts. So, okay. Basically, all you want to do here is just kind of give them a little more variation, something like that. Maybe rotate that a bit, scale that out a little more. Whoa, make sure you're moving them all together too. And when you're duplicating these, make sure you're giving them a little bit of variation in their height too, like I just did there. That way some of these will be blurred in the background when we add the depth of field and all that other stuff. I'm actually going to move this up quite a bit. Scale that down. Yeah, and that's essentially all you do is you select them, press Shift-D to duplicate them, move them somewhere else, kind of adjust the curve, and you just keep doing that until you've got something that you're happy with. So I'm just going to pause the recording really quickly, and I'll be right back. Alright, so I probably could have done a lot more than this. I just did it pretty quickly, just to speed up the process. And because my computer slows down pretty significantly when I'm recording and I have a ton of data in the scene, so I didn't want to add too many. But as you can see, I just sort of duplicated them and kind of collected some of them a little bit more on the bottom there, the bottom left. If you render it or take a look at the rendered preview, it looks horrible, which is, don't worry, it's supposed to look like that right now. It will look better once we're done with it. Yeah, so basically it's what we have right now to work with. You know, I think I'm going to work with this material a little bit more really quickly, just because I'm kind of not happy with the amount of transparency in it, or lack of transparency in it, I guess I should say. So, make sure we have the bacteria light material selected. And basically, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this and combine that with the glass shader again, just so we can sort of control how transparent it is. Maybe we'll make that 0.4, make it a little less, maybe even 0.35. Alright, that'll work. Okay, so there are just a couple other things we have to do before we can move on to the compositing and all that. First, we need to cap the ends on these, and then we need to add the particle systems. So really quickly, to cap the ends, basically we're going to have to press Tab to go into edit mode, and I'm just going to select that edge loop. Again, that's Alt right click, and duplicate it by pressing Shift-D. Press P to make that a separate material, or a separate selection. And then we'll tab into edit mode on that, kind of extrude out a little bit. Turn off the array modifier for this, because we definitely don't want that. We still want the curve modifier, but... And then I'm just going to sort of work with that, to kind of get that to look the way I want it to. Something like that. Should be fine. And we'll click smooth shading there. Now if I render that, yeah, because it definitely looks a lot better when you cap the ends. So it's pretty much what I'm going to do to each of these. So again, you would just come down here, go into edit mode. Oops. Actually, we're probably just going to have to duplicate this. And I'm just going to get rid of the curve modifier right now. You may be wondering why we won't just apply the modifier before moving these around. The reason behind that is because we can only really apply the modifier to the casing and not the actual segments. Basically, the textures are all set up to work with these segments. So, essentially, if we apply the modifiers and everything, then it's going to throw off the textures, which we could go back and reposition all of them and adjust the size and shape and all those other things, but it's generally a lot of work. And it's typically best to do it this way, especially since we want to leave some of these ends uncapped, since some of these are they do kind of look broken off. So I'm just going to do this with some of these. So again, just duplicate that and kind of rotate it to get it to fit. Yeah, somewhere right around there. I'm going to pause the recording again while I do that. Okay, so I've capped the ends on most of these. There are just a couple little areas that haven't been capped yet. We also want the casings to follow these, of course. So to do that, in this case, like I said, we can apply these modifiers to the casings, since the only shaders that they have working for them right now are the ones that sort of split the shading off to the sides. So it's not as sensitive as some of the textures. So, yeah, I think I'm going to start doing that. So basically what you want to do is you just want to select one of these casings, click Apply the Array modifier, and apply the Curve modifier. And then you can just go in and... Whoa. Why is it scaling? Oh, I have both of those selected. That's not good. Okay. Okay. Make sure you only have that one part selected. Apparently it does select, or it already has the other section selected by default too, so be careful of that. Whoa. Kind of move that up a little farther. Get that to look right. Let's see how that looks before we go any farther. Okay. So, yeah, then you can see it sort of follows it around there to the end. It looks really cartoony right now, I know, but trust me, it will look better once we add a lot of the compositing and the particles and all that other stuff. So, let's go ahead and do those same things with these other parts. Again, press A to make sure everything is deselected. And then we can just sort of work with these a little bit more. You can kind of line up these edges with this middle edge going down the center of the segments there. And it's always a good idea to merge those vertices at the end, just so that you don't have extra faces and extra vertices. Okay. So, I don't have very many of these to do this with. Just make sure that you always apply those modifiers before you... Oh, okay. Let's press W and click Remove Doubles, because it looks like we've got some extra vertices in there. Okay. So, we'll just connect all those. And you get the idea. Okay, so now that we've got all those settled, I think I got them all. Double check to make sure I did. But now that we've got all those settled, along with the rest of the actual segmented parts, we can finally add the particle systems to all of this. So again, one last time, you want to go through and make sure you've applied the modifiers to all of these. So again, go through and apply. Make sure that you remove the doubles. I actually meant to adjust that in the modifiers earlier, because there is a way to merge. Oops. There is a way to merge the vertices so that you don't have that issue, but at this point it's just a lot faster to go through and do it this way. Okay, I think that's... Oh, one more. Whoa. There we go. Okay. So first of all, there's going to be we need to basically make sure that there is one primary bacterium that will be the main focus of the image, basically something that the camera will focus on, and everything else will be kind of obscured from view. As you can see, there are sort of a couple in this picture on the right. But for simplicity's sake, it would probably work best just to have maybe one or two. I guess we could probably bring down two. Bring this really close there. Oh, whoops. I'm going to make sure we've got all of those selected. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is just add particle systems, but we don't have to add particle systems to all of these, is essentially what I was getting at earlier. We can just apply them to the ones that are really in focus. So I'm going to come over here and add a new particle system. We'll name this dots, particle settings, dots. I'm going to change the type from emitter to hair. Check the advanced settings, and we'll start out with something like 100, because 100 is probably going to be a good number. And let's set the distribution to random and uncheck even distribution. And that'll just jumble things up a bit more so it's not quite as uniform. And we'll come down here to object, and we're going to load, I forgot to rename all those, but whatever. And we'll choose dot. And that's way too big, obviously. We'll try 0.005. We'll render that and see how that looks. Okay, so we can sort of see him there. Maybe a little too tiny. We'll try 0.006. Make him a little bit bigger. I also like to add a lot of random size, so maybe make that a lot bigger and make the maximum size 0.007 or even 0.008. Yeah, now you can really see him starting to come through. Yeah, so that looks pretty good. And basically we've just got to do that to some of these other ones that will be in focus. But so we can determine that, before we go any farther, let's add that depth of field. So we can select the camera, come over here to the camera properties, and let's set the focus to a specific object. Let's set it to this object right here. That is 1. That's what we named it. So I'm just going to select that right there on the focus. Switch to rendered, and I'm going to make the size 2. Okay, and obviously that's too strong. I made the size a bit too big. We'll try 1 instead. Maybe even less than that, maybe 0.75. I'm also going to increase the sampling in the preview here and in the render, just so we can get a better feel for what it's actually like. Okay, so I might want to go even a tiny bit smaller than that, actually. I might go with 0.5. Yeah, that works. Okay. However, if I'm doing that, I think I also want to move this back a bit farther, because it looks like that was getting a bit too sharp for my taste. So we'll make sure that's nice and blurred. And that's pretty good. So as you can see, we only have 2, maybe 3 other bacterium that we would need to add these particles to. So let's just take care of that really quickly. We'll just select these other casings. Come up here, add a new particle system, just load the dots settings on each of these. I believe this was another one. Load dots there too. We'll see how that looks. Okay. Probably have one on here too. Let me make sure that I've got the right thing selected. Add a new setting there. Make sure that's good. See that again. Okay, and then I'm just going to add one more right there. Select that and add the dots particle settings. Alright, so as far as everything in the viewport and whatnot goes, we're pretty much done. All we have left to do is compositing. And you'd be surprised at the world of a difference that compositing actually makes in this render. So I'm just going to set the render samples to 100, something low like that. And maybe increase that size to 75, and I'm just going to render it really quickly. And we'll see how that looks. I think that'll work pretty well. You can sort of see some of the ends in the back that I didn't cap. Okay. Yeah, that works. Most of the compositing work we're going to be doing is contrast and saturation related work, but we're also going to be adding maybe a tiny bit of chromatic aberration, maybe a little bit of bloom, maybe, I'm not sure about that. And of course lens distortion, at least around the edges, to make it look as though this image were taken through an actual microscope and not cropped in any way to eliminate that. Alright, it's almost done. We'll do a little color correction too outside of that. Okay, so yeah, that's essentially all we have to do for that part of the image. So I'm just going to come up here and switch over to compositing, and I'll check use nodes and backdrop. Let me just combine these. Okay, let me pull these farther apart, and I'm just going to add a viewer node, connect that just so we can see what we're doing. And the very first thing I want to do is I want to adjust the contrast. So basically I want to add an RGB curves node. And I think I am actually going to split my viewport again because I would like to reference our reference image again. Yeah, because you can see the colors are just way off at this point. We really have a lot of color correcting to do. And yeah, the contrast could certainly use quite a bit of work. Now I gotta reposition these. Sorry about that. Oops. Okay. So first of all, let's really bring up this contrast. Make the bright spots brighter and the dark spots darker. I'm kind of losing the background there. I might have to bring it farther up. Okay. Yeah, so that looks pretty good. The first thing you may notice is that the background is a lot more red in this than it is in here. Might be a little difficult to work with if we're trying to, because these are also a little too red themselves. I might want to make them a little more blue. But we'll get to the background after we finish with this stuff in the front. So we've got the contrast. It's getting there. Maybe we can even increase it a little more. Really bring in some of those darker spots. That looks better. Okay. And the next thing I want to do is I want to add a hue saturation value node, because this is too green, I think, at least. So I'm just going to bring up the hue to like 0.51, maybe even 0.52 to make it even more blue. And that's pretty close at this point. Maybe even 0.53. Yeah. Alright, and I'll even bump up the saturation a little bit more too, to give it a bit more color. Okay. So, yeah, I could probably drop that back down to 0.52. Okay. So we've got that all set up. The next thing I want to do is to add a little bit of bloom effect to it. Just a really quick... Whoa. Because it's looking a little sharp compared to the image down there, and I kind of want to soften it. So I'm just going to change that to fast Gaussian. And we'll create a mix node right there. And just combine these two. Whoa. There we go. And we'll bump that up to 1, 2, and 2. Yeah, something like that will probably work. Set the mix to be like 0.5. Not that high, definitely not that high. Or not that, yeah, we'll make it like 0.1. Compare that to the original there, maybe 0.2. Yeah, I think 0.2 will work a little better. Okay, so, kind of not too happy with the background right now. Maybe we can isolate that later. But for now, the next thing we want to work on, now that we've got that all worked out, is we basically want to add a little bit of chromatic aberration. Now, I'm not really a fan of using the dispersion option and the lens distortion node because it kind of blurs the image. So I'm actually just going to shift the image a little bit, maybe shift the red to cause that fringe that you're looking for. So I'm just going to add, I believe it's under Converter, separate RGBA. And I'm going to add a Translate node. And we'll just hook that up to there. Whoa. Maybe that's what we want to... No. Connect that to there and that to there. That's a little better. Okay. Yeah, we'll do something like that. Now we should probably keep that connected there. So, yeah, and basically we just want to shift this over a little bit, one by one, we'll say. And then we will create a combine RGBA. Whoa. It's really intense. And combine all these. So basically all we're doing is isolating that red color channel and then shifting it a little bit. And now you can see it's pretty strong effect. Really strong. Actually, I think I'm going to sort of dilute it by mixing that with the original. Maybe create a factor of 0.5. Because we want a little bit of it, but not too much, because you don't really see it that much in this area. Okay, so we've got that. Now the last thing we want to do before maybe trying to fix some of these colors a little more is we want to add this kind of dark corner effect to give it the circular photo look. So I'm just going to add a distort, lens distortion node. Whoa. Combine those. And I'm just going to drag the distortion all the way up to 1. I'm going to go over to Converter, Math, drop that into there, and I'm going to change this to greater than, set that to 0. That's just going to isolate the black part and erase the white part, so we can just overlay those black corners over the image. And I'm going to give this a bit of blur too, just because the edges look pretty bad when they're not blurred. And I'm just going to blur that by maybe 5. And then finally, I'm just going to change that to multiply so that it's overlaid right there on the top, just like that. And we'll connect that to the composite node there. Nope, we'll change this from render result to viewer node. And yeah, that's currently what we have, which it's pretty good. Again, we lost some of the background there. I think I need to move that up a little farther, so I'm going to take care of that right now. Make it a little sharper, maybe. Move that up to there. Alright, we'll render that out again. So, yeah, I think the colors are still a little bit off overall. Not sure what I can do about that in the time I have left, but we'll see. Alright, we still sort of lost the background back there. I think it's okay, though, honestly. We can still see some of it along there. We don't want it to look too polluted, because it might become kind of unrealistic if we overplay that effect. I think the lighting works pretty well overall, so I'm going to see one last time if I can do anything about those colors. Because the bacteria themselves need to be a little more blue, but the background and everything else needs to be a little more red. Really don't want to go into render layers because I don't really have the time for that. You know, actually, I can probably, I'm just gonna merge these for now, just so we have a little more space here to work with. Basically, what we can probably do, I'm gonna move these over even more, is I'm gonna isolate the initial image, basically, the bacteria from the background. So I'm just going to take a look at that, and I'm going to drag that all the way up, bring that all the way down. There we go. Now basically, all I'm trying to do is going to go over here and add a, can't remember what node it was. I think it was, maybe it was under, yeah, there it is. Okay, converter. I'm just going to convert that to black and white. Yeah. Basically, we can probably use this as a mask as far as adding colors and whatnot go. So, yeah, I'm actually going to, this would probably be better to do more before we added the chromatic aberration. So I'm just going to drag these nodes over, and we'll put them right about here. I'm going to push these aside, drop these in here, connect that there. Okay. Whoa, lost my viewer node. There it is. Alright. I'm really running out of time here, so I've got to hurry it up. But basically what we can do is we can use this as a mask, so we can have a more red image and a more blue image and combine them this way. So let's make sure we have the more blue image set. I'm going to make sure this is set to be around 5.53, maybe even 0.535, which is quite a bit. And then I'm going to duplicate that hue and saturation node. And I'm just going to connect it. Whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay. Connect that there. And then we'll duplicate that and connect that. Duplicate that. Connect that. Except we actually want that there. That's right. Okay. Alright, and then we'll make this one... Yeah, that's really blue. We'll make this one more red than blue. So I'm going to try 0.47. That's really green. Maybe 0.2. It's wow. Okay. 0.1. Getting there. Not really getting the background that I was hoping for. Maybe it would be better to just have a regular old, I think that would be under input RGB. There we go. I'm just going to have a regular old red color right there, and we can sort of overlay that with the result that we have there. So I'm just going to mix that with that, and that with... Whoa. That is the factor, except we want to flip those around. Obviously, that's just way too intense and not going to work. So I'm going to duplicate that and maybe mix that with the original one. Maybe make that 0.98, 0.95, 0.5. Okay, so it is coming in. There we go. Maybe 0.8. Yeah, now we can really see. I might actually make that a little more orange too, but we can really see the color coming in the background there. Maybe 0.85. Yeah. Okay. So that's really more or less the effect that I was going for. It's just to kind of get a bit more of a red-orange background, but more blue bacteria. So now that we've got that, actually, I can connect all of these, that to that, that to that, and it should, yeah, okay. Maybe we'll make that a little higher, like 0.875, so it's not quite as noticeable. But yeah, that's essentially it. So that's what we had initially. Sort of the blue-green background, and then that's what we have now. Still blue bacteria, but kind of a more orangish background. And that's essentially it for this tutorial. So, thanks for watching. I apologize for the length about this one. It was a little longer than I intended for it to be. But I hope you learned something out of it. And yeah, that's all. Thanks.